All right, so we just went for a hike that was way harder than expected in the snow in Seattle. So this is my brother Sam, and Sam is a product leader at Dropbox, and we were just chatting about some really great topics. So we decided to turn the video on
and try to have the conversation all over again.
Yeah, exactly.
But still feel authentic.
Exactly. Yeah. So we'll do our best. But I think there's two conversations to have actually. So maybe we make two separate videos. But the one that you were just talking about was this concept of a first team and creating these authentic layers of conversation with employees. So where do you want to start?
Well, I think we should start with, this all started with you. We were talking about remote work.
Yeah.
And the differences between in-person and remote work. And I think we both feel remote work is going to stay.
Yeah.
And I guess it's debatable whether it's fully remote or hybrid.
Right.
And then you were talking about the hallway, like how do you maintain that culture?
Yeah, it actually came from Mitchell Hashimoto, who said a great thing, which is in a company where all the employees are distributed, you don't have those moments of connection that happen in the hallway. And so it's important to prioritize them really in every interaction. And so one of the things that we did at Armory, and now Sue is doing at Graph CDN, is this concept of a check-in question. So in every meeting, we type in Slack check-in question, and there's a Slack bot that pulls from really just a list of like 200 check-in questions, pops up the check-in question, and everybody answers it, and it's just an opportunity to build community and culture together and get to know the full person and not just the professional. So that's been working well. And then you were like,
well, so a question about that. So
yeah.
do you need a shared Slack channel to?
Yeah, exactly. Well, no. So the way that you can do this with Slack is you can configure Slackbot to respond with any keywords, and Slackbot can respond in any open channel whenever you type a trigger word, right? So we just made check-in question the trigger word, and then like anybody can do this with their Slack. It's pretty easy to do. In fact, we wrote it up in the KB in Founder Culture, and we even put the list of like hundreds of check-in questions. So you basically just load those into Slack, and then you can have a Slack channel called check-in questions, or you can do it in any channel that Slackbot's in. And you just type in check-in question, and it'll reply back with one random check-in question for the group.
So if I'm in a one-on-one or like a 4-person meeting and I don't have a Slack channel, I just Slack the 4 of us check-in question?
Yeah, I mean, you could just Slack it to yourself, to the group. Yeah. Like, it's just, it removes the cognitive overhead of like taking 2 minutes of the meeting to be like, what should our check-in question be?
Right.
It's like, it's whatever Slackbot says.
Okay. And so then that got me thinking about Victor. Shout out to Victor if he ever watches this. So Victor is the CEO of 5 Stars. And I've been fascinated by Victor's leadership of 5 Stars, which specifically around like humility, which is one of the 4 company values, and authenticity. 2 of the 4 values are humility and authenticity. And so I was telling you about how Vic runs team meetings and runs teams, and Vic had the executive team read 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is a classic book. And one of the concepts that I think was meaningful to Vic in that book was the concept of a first team. And so the first team is the smallest group of people that need to be in a room in order to accomplish a common goal. And the book makes the point that for like a VP of sales or a VP of product, the first team is the executive team, not your sales team.
Which is like that resonated so deeply with me, because I think sales leaders often prioritize protecting their sellers, their AEs. Right. So when they're having conversations about comp, there's been plenty of conversations with sales leaders and finance leaders that get pretty heated because the sales leader is thinking that his or her first team is to the sellers. So that was a really great way to think about it.
Yeah.
That like the loyalty of the sales leader, his or her first team is the executive staff.
Yeah. And so Vic is big about that. And so for the first team at 5 stars, one of the things we would meet every week, kind of a standard executive meeting. It was like a 2 or 3 hour meeting. But Vic would spend the first 30 minutes asking everybody to share props and life updates.
Props being like kudos. Not like stage props.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that was interesting about the props, so they were incredibly authentic and vulnerable, like in a way that I haven't seen in other teams. So often it's like, hey, like, thanks for shooting that email over to Sandra. Like, I know I emailed you at 7 and you emailed her like within an hour. That was amazing. Thanks. But for Vic, that's not like really a prop. So for Vic, it's like, first of all, because of the first team, you're giving a prop. The intention seemed to be, or the culture he created was like, you're giving a prop to somebody else in the room. You're not really, people would do this occasionally, but you're not really giving props to like somebody on their team. You're like looking at them in the eye. And also the culture that he created was like one where you would tie the prop to like the values of the company. So the values at 5 stars were shared humility, authentic relationships, joy every day, warrior spirit, like have grit basically. And so it'd be like, hey Daniel, when you gave your town hall presentation on product, the energy you brought to the room, it just like, it was such an incredible example of joy. And like, I just found myself energized after that town hall, and I looked around on the Zoom meeting and like everybody was smiling, and so that was a prop, and we would spend 30 minutes of a team meeting on props. And so at Dropbox, I've been doing this, and we only have a 1 hour team meeting once a week for the first team, but I still spend 30 minutes of the team meeting on props. And the first time I did that, like, people pulled me aside and they're like, I've never been in a team meeting like that. And
one really cool construct that you're making me think of, and this came from Cameron at Torch, so shout out to Cameron if you see this, is that level 1, level 2, level 3 conversation framework, which is like, level 1 conversations is just getting work done. Level 2 conversations is, I have opinions about you and your performance. And level 3 conversations, the most vulnerable, I have opinions about my performance. And what I hear you saying is that Vic didn't want level 1 props. Right? He wanted level 2 props.
Or even like level 3, where it's like you're connecting it to your own emotional experience.
Yeah, right.
Like when you did this, this was another thing that 5 stars did incredibly well. So our head of HR, people ops is what we call it, brought like really interesting frameworks from like relational therapy frameworks and couples counseling frameworks. And so like nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg.
Erica will love this, by the way, because she is a nonviolent communication professional facilitator. So Erica is our director of community.
Oh, she's got to talk to Claudia.
Yeah. Well, so what's interesting is a big part of founder culture that we're trying to unlock is, I think founders often don't realize why this matters until the freight train hits them. And so if founders aren't investing in these skills proactively, then people, as the company scales, reactively get very unhappy, or they don't have motivation, they don't have purpose. And so it's, how do we help founders understand why this matters?
Nonviolent communication. Why would nonviolent communication matter? Yeah. And so like at 5 stars, it was like the props, it was almost like in the water, where you would often express your own emotional experience of it, because nonviolent communication was a concept that had been like practiced in the organization. And it was introduced within the concept of giving feedback. The class, for those that haven't heard of this, like nonviolent communication is like, when you give feedback, you talk about your own experience. Like, hey, when you sent out that email with those 4 expletives, I personally felt ashamed, and that's like a key part of it. But it also felt like it was very connected to other parts of the culture at 5 stars, like props. And so the point you're making is like, hey, you've got to set up these frameworks early.
Like, be thinking about them as the leader. So be thinking, first is like, decide if you believe that this matters. Because I think the first thing is like, do I care about creating an intentional culture or do I want to, because every company has a culture, or do I want to let the culture happen without me being intentional about it? So I think that's the first decision, is do I want to be proactive and intentional about the culture? And then it's, okay, what do I need to learn? What are my unknown unknowns about what it even means to act in certain ways and have an intentional culture? And then there's all sorts of frameworks. If you become interested in these things, like obviously Vic was, which is amazing. It's amazing to watch you talk about how impactful it's been.
Oh man, right? It's life-changing for me. It's definitely career-changing to have worked with him.
Yeah. And by the way, for anybody watching this in the KB, we have a number of resources. So Erica has put some nonviolent communication resources in, and Erica will talk to you about that anytime. She's great at that. That's one thing. We put the action impact framework in, so where you can talk about the action and the impact it had on you, instead of talking about them being bad or your opinion about them. It's like, when you did this factual thing, it had this impact on me. And then we also put into the KB about figuring out how to put the tension on the other side of the table. So you're not on the other side of the table from your colleague, you're on the same side of the table, and it's the tension that's on the other side of the table, and you're working with your colleague to figure out how to resolve that tension. So yeah, there's a bunch of resources, if you care to look into this, that are in the KB, and there's a lot more that we'd love to get in there, because it's just the beginning.
And so basically the point of this whole conversation, though, is all of this is a lot more important in a remote world.
Yeah,
you have to be more intentional about
this. That's a good way to, I guess that's a good way to frame it, which is you don't have the safety net of being there in the room with the person eye to eye, where you can get all the additional cues and understanding about what's going on. Or
like the foundation of like the beers you grabbed last week with that person to get to know them.
It's kind of like currency. Like you make deposits when you do those things, and then you make withdrawals when you hurt somebody, but you're not making those deposits anymore in a distributed workforce. So it only becomes withdrawals, and people get, I think everyone has fatigue about that right now.
Yeah.
They're not feeling as motivated. There's another one that's in the KB, which is really powerful, called the active listening framework. So just repeating back to somebody what you heard them say. I literally don't think that I've heard somebody repeat back fully the first time that they repeat back what they heard to somebody, which means that like almost 100% of the time we're communicating something and the person is not receiving the full thing that we communicated. And that's just like mind-blowing to me that happens, and we usually don't call it out.
Right.
So yeah,
there's a whole different topic about like that to me is very connected to managing up. Managing up, I feel like, is almost this dirty phrase, but like understanding, and later in my career I've grown to understand the value of truly understanding like the executive above me, or the the executive layer, or the CEO if I'm reporting to a CEO, and what is their
or the
first
board if you are
or the
CEO.
board. Yeah.
I always check being a CEO as a middle manager position.
And like, what's the first principles of like where they are operating from, and when they're verbalizing something, what are they verbalizing? Can you repeat that back to them in a way they understand? But then also, what are the first principles driving that? And then what is the most direct path to accomplishing that first principles ask? Because often it's not the same as what they're verbalizing, you know?
And just like in product land, people always talk about the solution, when really they should be talking about their pain. It's the same kind of a thing.
Yeah. That's a separate
separate
video. That's another 30 minutes.
That'll be the next video. Sue also has a lot of amazing resources and has been doing a lot of great things at Graph CDN, so she's another good resource. So if you're an early stage founder and you don't yet understand why this matters, I think the thing that I would say is, if you have hired anybody, which maybe you've hired one or two people, you have an opportunity to start now in understanding what it is that you don't know about how you can make that employee more successful and create a culture that unlocks a lot of really good positive things. And if you do that now, you're not going to have the freight train hit you when you get to 100 or 150 people.
You know, this is interesting because, like, okay, so I was talking to Gabor, who's a principal at Area 120. So he founded Area 120 with a handful of people, and Area 120 is Google's incubator, right? So they incubate startups, and they've had a handful of something like $1 billion outcome. Like the last outcome I was talking to him about was something like $700 million in revenue. And he was saying that the teams, there's around a 20% success rate for these teams, so where they've exited in some ROI positive way. of the 80% that fail, half fail for like execution reasons, like just wrong technology or something. The other half fail for team reasons.
Yeah, that's
right.
amazing.
And so when you're thinking about, like, when you're a founder and you have one employee, you're like, why do I do this?
Yeah. Or even with your co-founders, like,
or with your co-founder.
Like Gary from Initialize says, founder conflict is the #1 killer of startups.
So, like, why do I do this? The reality, so it's like you should be, theoretically, you should be putting as much energy into this as you're putting into, like, the technology and the solution you're building. And
well, so that's Sue's famous phrase, right? Employees want a product to believe in and a place to belong. And the product to believe in, we have very well instrumented. You know, a lot of funnel metrics and understanding conversion rates, and the place to belong is just like haphazardly done. It's like we live in a world. It's like math before calculus. Like everyone's doing different things, and there's no real good answers and structures to this.
Yeah.
It's just amazing how people often don't even realize how important it is. So that's a really good quantifiable metric to drive the importance.
Yeah.
Cool.
Nice.
All right. Well, really nice.
We should do. This makes me think we should do like the Odio Brothers podcast.
Yeah. We could totally, like, we've talked to Erica about doing like a founder culture podcast. Yeah, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. See you, everyone. Ciao.